In this section we're going to start to look at some of the other types of data visualization technique, which are not strictly speaking charts and graphs as such, but are very closely associated with those. We're going to start with Sparklines, a new feature introduced in Excel 2010. Now I'm going to introduce you to the idea of Sparklines by an example. This table shows an extended version of the data we looked at earlier on relating to monthly sales by a sales team. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a new column B, and I'm going to include in that Sparklines. So, having inserted the empty column, I now select the data that's going to be used for the Sparklines. Now on the Insert tab there is a Sparklines group, and there are in fact three sorts of Sparklines. There is line, column and win-loss, and we're going to start with line. If I click on line, insert line Sparkline, what Excel 2010 asks me for is the data range, which I've already selected, C2 to N6, and then it asks me to choose where I want the Sparklines to be placed. Now I can select those like this, click on OK, and there are my Sparklines. Okay, what are the Sparklines? Well, the Sparkline is really a little line graph. If you look at the first salesperson, Anne Carnegie, and look at the sales over the period of a year, just squeeze the last one or two in. I'll just zoom out a little. You can see that basically if you look at the Sparkline, you can see that Anne's sales have fluctuated over the year with a slightly downward trend. So 321, 64 was a dip, 414 was a bit of a peak, went up to 503, which is in fact the best month she's had, and then it sort of slightly oscillated down. Now for each of my salespeople I have a little graph showing their performance over the course of the year. That's a Sparkline. Now once you've inserted Sparklines, and you'll normally insert Sparklines in a group like this, you have access to the Sparkline Tools Design tab, and on that there are a number of commands and functions that we need to look at. One of them is that we can change between the three different types of Sparkline. Now to help with this a little bit, I'm just going to zoom in a little. We won't be able to see all of the data, but we'll be able to see the Sparklines a little better. And one of the things I can do is to change the type of Sparkline. There are actually three types: the line that we've seen, the column, which basically shows the same data but as a column chart, and then there's a win-loss. Now in relation to this sort of data, the win-loss is not really a relevant type. So let's go back to the line. Now by default the axes and scales on which each of the Sparklines are drawn are independent of each other. So for instance, if we look at this lowest performing person here, Ang Lee, in January, the scale that's used to draw this little Sparkline for that person will be a different scale to the one that's used to draw that person. Now we actually created the Sparklines all at the same time. When we do that, they're actually created as a group, and if I select the group, one option I have on the Sparkline Tools Design tab is to ungroup them, and this breaks a set of group Sparklines into individual Sparklines. While they're grouped, if I go into Edit Data the first command on that toolbar. I find Edit Group Location and Data, and what that lets me do is to select the source for the data for this group. So if I wanted to actually now take this from a different data set, so for instance, if instead of going B2 to B6 I wanted to put the sparklines somewhere else, I could reposition them. I could also change the basis on which the data are selected, so I could choose from a different selection of data. Similarly, if I were to ungroup these into individual sparklines and then perhaps select that middle one, when I go into Edit Data, I can edit a single sparkline's location and the data that the sparkline is built from, in this case C4 to N4. So let me now group them back up again, select and then group, and they're back as a group. Now let's look at some of the other formatting options here. Sparklines are actually designed to be included in a small space, often a single cell on a worksheet that may itself be zoomed out from. But you can actually add levels of information to the sparkline. So for instance, using the show group here, you can show high points, so basically the peak for each of our 5 salespeople, and indeed you can show the low points, last points, and so on. And with each of these you have options here to change the marker colors, so you can change the marker color for negative points, high points, low points, and so on. And in fact there's another control here for changing sparkline color itself. There is actually a style gallery here, although it only really affects the color of the lines themselves, which you can set separately using that color control, so it's not something I personally have used very much. But one very important control is this one, the sparkline axis control. Now if you click on that, you have a number of options, and particularly the lower 2 groups it's worth being aware of: vertical axis minimum value options, vertical axis maximum value options. At the moment, by default, they're set to automatic for each sparkline. So each sparkline is treated on the basis of the values, in this case of sales for the individual salesperson, as I explained before. But you can actually say that it needs to be the same for all sparklines. And similarly, you could say the vertical axis needs to be the same for all sparklines, and then everybody is being measured on the same level. And you can see that generally speaking there's quite a difference in the pattern of their sales over the course of this year. You can also set custom values, so you can actually set the minimum and maximum values for these scales, which means that it makes it easier for you to compare them, say, with the performance of another group or something like that. Again, back at this control, you have a general axis type. You can actually change the axis type depending on the range of values that are featured in the data you're using. Now, one very special thing about sparklines, which is not at all apparent when you first come across them, is that they're actually built on a separate layer from the main content of a worksheet. And you can actually put other data in the same cell with a sparkline, and this can actually be surprisingly useful. Now I'm going to demonstrate this by increasing the height of each of these rows in this spreadsheet. I'm just going to basically approximately double the height. Obviously I could do this accurately if I wanted to. For the purposes of this, I'm just going to roughly double the height. And then I'm going to select this group of sparklines, click on axis, and I'm going to set a custom value for the axes of 1,200 pounds or dollars, depending on what we're taking these sales values to be. Just see what happens now to the sparklines. The sparklines still definitely show the shape, but in each case there's a bit more space in the cell. Now let me take one of these cells, say this one, and I'm actually going to type in there now Anne Carnegie. Oops, Carnegie. Now you may think that in the way that this normally happens with Excel, as soon as I type in there I delete what's there already. Well, because the sparkline information is on a different layer, that's not the case. And if I tick this, note the sparkline is still there, and so is the name Anne Carnegie. So let me now format this cell. Right click, format cells. I'm going to change the alignment in the cell. Horizontal it will be center and vertical will be top, and note what happens. Now it has absolutely no impact on the sparkline, but it does change the alignment of Anne's name. Let me go into format cells again. This time I'm going to the font. It's currently Arial Bold 10 point. I'm going to make it Arial Regular 8 point. Click on OK again, and there we are. You can see we have a sparkline line with a label in the same cell. It's actually pretty straightforward to do, and you're pretty safe to experiment with it as well, because the sparklines aren't affected by those same formatting options. So let's just look at a couple more aspects of sparklines that are quite important. I've got here some other economic data relating to an unnamed country, and it shows for that country over a period of 8 years 3 key economic indicators: GDP, unemployment rate in percent, and population. Now, as before, if I insert a column to hold the sparklines, just zoom out so that you can see the whole data selection. Select the data, go to the Insert tab, and I'm going to insert line sparklines. Select the group of cells where the sparklines are going to go, click on OK, and there are my sparklines. Now, while the sparklines are grouped, they are going to all be of the same type. Let me just zoom in there. Although, of course, considering the data that they represent, the scales are extremely different. GDP is measured in, this will probably be dollars per individual, the unemployment rate as a percentage, and the population in people, which actually runs into millions. So they're definitely on different scales, but they're all lines. While I've got the 3 here together with the selection box around them, I can now ungroup, and now each of the sparklines can take on its own life. And if I go to a particular one, say the first one, the GDP one, I could change its type to column, and then that alone will be shown as a column. And as you can see, I can get a good visual representation of how GDP has changed. I can also apply, of course, a style, change the colouring on that, and I could, for instance, change the population as well, also to column, and choose a style on that as well, perhaps that one. So once you've ungrouped them, you can treat them all separately. And clearly, of course, as we saw just now, I could put additional labelling information in here as well. So there we are. That's pretty much it for sparklines. In the next section, we're going to look at data bars. I'll see you then.